How everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe my channel. The air left my lungs so fast it felt like somebody had driven a fist straight through my ribs. The private dining room at Belrose on Oak Street glowed under amber pendant lights, all polished brass and smoked mirrors and white linen so crisp it looked sharpened. And across the table my mother-in-law was smiling with her mouth and not her eyes. Sophia Marcus slid the envelope into my lap beneath the tablecloth, her knuckles brushing my knee, her fingers cold and trembling against the silk of my dress. Her manicure was perfect, pale pink, not a chip on it, but her hand shook hard enough to rattle the heavy cream stationery inside. She didn't look at me when she whispered, "You have 24 hours. Then Judith Whitmore set a stack of glossy color printouts on the mahogany Lazy Susan and said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Would anybody like to explain why my daughter-in-law has been stealing from the family foundation?" My husband Daniel froze with his wineglass halfway to his mouth. His younger sister Paige leaned back in her chair and folded one cashmere-sheathed arm over the other, the corner of her lip lifting like she'd been waiting for a cue. Robert Whitmore, the family patriarch, adjusted the gold cuff at his wrist and stared at me over the rim of his glasses with the patient disgust of a surgeon looking at a contaminated instrument. Anne Martin Kessler, the Whitmores' longtime attorney, placed both hands flat on the table, spreading his fingers over the documents as if he personally had discovered my guilt. "My name is Evelyn Mercer Whitmore. I'm 38. And this is the story of how I let my husband and his family think they had buried me, right up until the moment they realized they had been digging their own grave." The first page Judith shoved toward me was a screenshot of a wire transfer. The second was an LLC registration. The third was a photograph of me leaving a downtown office building I had never entered under my real name. "Halcyon Advisory Group," Judith said, tapping the paper with one lacquered nail. "Ring any bells?" Daniel found his voice first. "Evelyn," he said in that low, disappointed tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable in front of an audience, "if there is something I don't know, now would be the time." He was performing. I could see it in the way he kept his shoulders relaxed, in the careful placement of his hand beside his water glass, in how he made sure not to touch me. Distance was part of the scene. Paige gave a breathy laugh and reached for one of the printouts. "I told Mom months ago something was off. Nobody is that quiet unless they're hiding something." I looked at Sophia for the first time. She was seated 2 chairs down from Daniel, technically there as the Whitmore Group's director of brand partnerships, though everybody at the table knew she had become something else over the last 6 months. She kept her gaze fixed on her salad plate, fork untouched, dark hair falling forward to hide half her face. Her throat moved when she swallowed. Martin slid another page toward me. "We have transfers totaling $480,000 routed through a consulting entity linked to you. We have access logs from foundation servers. We also have a prepared criminal referral. Before we decide whether to submit it tomorrow morning, we'd like to hear whether you intend to cooperate." It was almost elegant the way they'd staged it. Not at home where emotion could get messy. Not at the office where witnesses might be loyal to me. They'd chosen a room with velvet drapes, brass sconces and a wall of backlit bottles. A place designed to make people feel small and expensive at the same time. They had chosen Tuesday because Robert always hosted donors on Thursday and he needed the scandal handled before the weekend. They had chosen dinner because people feel most trapped while seated. And they'd chosen an accusation involving the foundation because it touched the family name, which meant they assumed I would panic and beg privately rather than let it spread. They really did think they knew me. Judith lifted her martini. "I am trying very hard to handle this as family." "No," I said evenly. "You're trying to handle this as optics." The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel turned to me. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "This cold little word game you play when you're cornered." I folded my napkin once and set it beside my plate. "I don't need a game, Daniel." Paige let out a sharp little scoff. God listened to her. She still thinks she has leverage. Robert finally spoke, his voice dry as paper. "You married into this family 9 years ago. We gave you trust, position, respect. If you've mistaken that for weakness, tonight is your correction." It would have been a good line if he hadn't rehearsed it. I reached down, took the envelope from my lap and set it beneath the table edge on my thighs where no one could see. It was thick. More than a note. My pulse had slowed already. That happened when things became clear. While other people mistook stillness for shock, my mind arranged itself into drawers. I could feel the pieces sliding into place. Open it, Judith snapped, nodding toward the documents. Say something. I looked at the stack instead of her. The transfer screenshot had been lifted from the Foundation's internal audit portal. The LLC filing used the address of a registered agent service in Wilmington. The surveillance photo was from the lobby camera at Calder and Wren's satellite office on Franklin Street. They hadn't just prepared an accusation. They'd prepared a narrative. Concealment. Secret company. Secret meeting. Family betrayal. Except for one problem. I had built that narrative for them. 3 months earlier, when I noticed that the Mercer Whitmore Foundation's scholarship disbursements were being delayed while vendor invoices from shell marketing firms were being rushed through overnight approval, I had not confronted Daniel. I had not confronted Robert. I had smiled, finished my tea, and scheduled a consultation under a name Martin Kessler wouldn't recognize. A week after that, Halcyon Advisory Group had come into existence on paper, clean and ordinary and intentionally traceable. I had wanted to know who in the Whitmore orbit was siphoning funds. So I built a path shiny enough for thieves to follow. Like setting a silver trap in a dark pantry and waiting to hear the claws. They followed it beautifully. But Sophia's envelope changed the timeline. Daniel leaned toward me now, concern drawn carefully across his face. Evelyn, if this is about money, if you felt cut out, if you were angry about the board vote, we can fix this internally. There was the board vote. 2 weeks earlier, Robert and Judith had maneuvered me out of my executive role at the Foundation and into a ceremonial advisory position. They called it a restructuring. Daniel told me it would give me more freedom. Then 3 days later, he moved into the guest suite because we were, in his words, living parallel lives. Parallel apparently included a woman in a cream silk blouse who couldn't keep her hands steady. I looked at him for a long moment. His tie was midnight blue. He always wore blue when he wanted to seem trustworthy. You should be careful with the word internal, I said calmly. It implies this stays in the room. Martin's jaw tightened. Judith set her glass down too hard. The olive skidded in the bottom. You are in no position to threaten anyone, Martin said. That depends, I replied, on what Sophia put in the envelope. Every head at the table turned. Sophia's eyes flew to mine, then to Daniel. Color drained from his face so fast it seemed to gray under the warm light. Paige straightened. Robert's fingers curled once against the linen. Daniel smiled, but the expression arrived late. What are you talking about? I opened the envelope. Inside was a slim black flash drive, a folded printout, and a hotel key card in a paper sleeve stamped with the insignia of the Marlowe Grand. Room 1814. The printout was an email chain. Daniel's name at the top. Martin's beneath it. A subject line, Foundation Narrative Final Version. My name appeared 5 times in the first paragraph. The words Controlled Discovery and Media Containment appeared twice. Paige whispered, "What the hell is that?" I unfolded the page slowly. Deliberate slowness has a sound in a room like that. Paper opening. Fabric shifting. Somebody swallowing too loudly. Judith stood up so abruptly her chair legs scraped the hardwood. Sophia. Sophia finally looked up. Her mascara was immaculate. Her voice wasn't. I didn't know they were going to push it tonight. Daniel's whole body changed. The practiced softness dropped away and something rawer showed through. You stupid. Sit down, I said. Actually did. For 1 second nobody seemed to understand what had happened, least of all him. The room had tilted just slightly and he was still trying to find the floor. I placed the folded email beside my bread plate. You wanted to give me until tomorrow morning, I said. That was generous. Martin reached for the paper. I put my hand over it first. Don't, I said quietly. He stopped. So did everyone else. I had spent 9 years at tables like this. I knew exactly how power sounded when it was accustomed to being obeyed. It didn't need volume. It needed certainty. Men like Martin and Robert confused certainty with ownership. They never imagined it could belong to anybody else. Judith's voice sharpened into something almost shrill. Whatever that is, it doesn't change the transfers. No, I said. But it changes which ones matter. Daniel laughed once too quickly. This is absurd. You think one stolen email somehow absolves you. I turned to him. Actually, Daniel, what absolves me is that Halcyon Advisory was created at the instruction of my counsel as part of a private fraud trace. His expression went blank. Martin said, "That's not possible. It is when you don't know everything." I took out my phone, unlocked it, and opened the file folder I had prepared weeks earlier. Not because I had known tonight would happen exactly like this. Because when you live among people who curate reality the way museums curate light, you learn to carry your own electricity. "I'll make this simple," I said. "First, the account you say I used to divert foundation funds is an escrow account held through Calder and Wren Compliance Services. Second, every transfer into Halcyon was flagged, logged, and insured. Third, the only money that actually disappeared left 2 days after access credentials connected to Daniel's office requested a back-end override." Daniel's lips parted. Paige stared at him. Robert's hand tightened on the stem of his water glass. Martin recovered first. "Anybody can fabricate a file list on a phone." "Of course," I said. "Which is why I also brought paper copies." I reached into my bag and took out a neat stack bound with a black clip. I'd printed it that afternoon after Helena Price called to tell me the final forensic report was ready. I hadn't planned to use it at dinner. But I'd learned a long time ago that the Whitmores respected only what could be set down in front of them. I slid the packet across the Lazy Susan. The title page read, "Preliminary Forensic Summary, Mercer Whitmore Foundation. Prepared by Price and Vale LLP." Judith looked at the letterhead first. People like Judith always looked at the letterhead first. Robert said, "Price and Vale." There was recognition in his voice. Good. Helena Price wasn't the kind of attorney people forgot. "Yes," I said. "You've heard of her." Daniel tried to scoff, but it caught halfway. "You hired outside counsel without telling me." I met his eyes. "You were sleeping with your employee without telling me." "We both made administrative decisions." Paige sucked in a breath so hard it almost whistled. Sophia closed her eyes. "No," Daniel snapped. "No, do not do that. Don't turn this into some jealous diversion because you're desperate." I tapped the hotel key card with one finger. "Room 1814 doesn't strike me as a diversion." Judith turned on Sophia. "Is that true?" Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. "It started in November." Paige made a sound like a laugh breaking in half. Robert looked at Daniel with cold disbelief, not because of the affair itself but because he'd been blindsided by its timing. Men like Robert didn't mind moral failure. They hated operational sloppiness. I let that settle over the table before I continued. Revelation worked best in layers. Never all at once. Never enough for them to adjust. "Since we're being honest," I said, "there are 3 more things you should know." Daniel's chair creaked as he sat back. He was trying to look bored. His left knee was bouncing under the table. "1. The access logs in your packet," I said, nodding toward Martin's documents, "were altered at 7:14 this morning from a device registered to the Executive Legal Office. Which means someone tried to place my credentials at the center of this after the audit trail already existed." Martin's complexion lost a shade. 2. The shell vendors receiving foundation payments all route to the same beneficial owner network in Nevada. The management signatures on the original filings were witnessed by a notary who, unfortunately for all of you, remembers Daniel very well because he spelled his own middle name wrong. Paige stared at her brother. "You signed them yourself?" Daniel snapped, "Shut up, Paige." 3. I said, my voice still level. The board vote that removed me from financial oversight took place 48 hours after I filed an internal memorandum flagging irregular disbursements tied to Whitmore Strategic Holdings. I filed it from my office. It vanished from the server 36 minutes later. But not before it auto-archived to a secure external backup. This time Robert sat down hard enough that the leather seat sighed beneath him. No one spoke. I took a sip of water. The glass was cold. Condensation slipped over my fingers. Across from me, Daniel's breathing had gone visible in the hollow of his throat. Martin tried again, but his voice had flattened. "Even if what you're saying were true, that doesn't explain why this woman," he flicked a disgusted glance toward Sophia, "would be in possession of privileged correspondence." Sophia answered before I could. "Because Daniel used my laptop to draft half of it." Daniel turned so sharply his chair bumped the sideboard. "You are lying." She laughed, then one dry, tired sound. You forwarded your own drafts to my personal account because you didn't want Evelyn seeing them on the home server. You wanted me to clean the language up so it sounded less vindictive. Judith pressed one hand to the base of her throat. Daniel. He stood. This is insane. This is exactly what she does. She twists things. She manipulates people. You have no idea what it's like living with someone who... Stop, I said. He stopped again. That was becoming a pattern. The waiter chose that moment to enter with the main course. Seared halibut for Judith, filet for Robert, saffron risotto for Paige, duck breast for Daniel, and for me, though I had long since lost my appetite, wild mushroom pappardelle in a wide white bowl. He set the plates down with the solemn precision of a priest handling relics, taking in the room's temperature without letting it touch his face. Belrose trained its staff well. No interruptions, I said once he left. Daniel gave me a look of pure hatred then. Not loud hatred. Not theatrical hatred. The quiet kind, concentrated and metallic. I am not the one who should be afraid right now, he said. I set my fork across the rim of my bowl. Actually, Daniel, I said, you were committing fraud. Paige made a choking noise. Judith sank back into her chair. Martin reached for the forensic packet at last, flipping pages with suddenly impatient fingers. Robert didn't move at all. He was reading the table now the way other men read markets, calculating exposure. I could almost hear the scene they had envisioned collapsing in on itself like wet plaster. Martin found the page with the preliminary flow chart. I knew the exact moment because his hand stopped. Then he looked up at Daniel, and that tiny involuntary pause told me everything. He had not known how much Daniel had done without him. Good. That's the thing about powerful families. Their weakness is never morality. Ego. They can withstand scandal, lawsuits, betrayals. What they cannot withstand is discovering the person next to them withheld leverage. Judith tried to regain altitude. Even if there were irregularities. She swallowed and started again. Even if Daniel made mistakes, this does not excuse your secrecy, Evelyn. You built an entire company behind our backs. Yes, I said. To find out which of you would try to use it. Paige stared at me as if she were seeing me for the first time. Which, to be fair, she was. For years I had let the family mistake discretion for passivity because it made my work easier. I was the one who remembered birthdays, fixed donor crises, rewrote embarrassing statements before the press saw them, soothed Judith's board disputes, corrected Robert's naming mistakes before any junior staffer caught them. I had been the velvet over the blade. People stop looking for steel when you hand them softness every day. Daniel dragged both hands through his hair. What do you want? There was not denial. Not righteousness. Terms. I slid the hotel key card back into the envelope. Tonight. Nothing. He laughed incredulously. You expect us to believe that? I stood, smoothing the front of my black crepe dress. No. I expect you to believe your own lawyers when they call in the morning. Martin rose half out of his chair. Sit down. We are not done here. I picked up my coat. You're right, I said. You're not. Sophia looked at me with something like fear and relief braided together. I gave her the smallest nod. At the door I turned back once. Robert was staring at the price and veil packet. Judith had both hands braced against the table as if steadying herself on a ship. Paige was scrolling frantically through her phone, probably checking whether anybody outside the room already knew. Daniel looked like a man who had just realized the fire alarm had been ringing for weeks and he had mistaken it for background noise. By the way, I said almost gently, next time you stage an intervention, make sure the witness isn't working for both sides. Then I walked out under the low amber lights past the mirrored bar and the carved walnut host stand and the rain-slicked windows facing Oak Street, with the envelope tucked under my arm and my spine straight. They thought they had given me 24 hours. They had no idea I'd spent 3 months building the clock. The next few days moved with the clean violence of machinery. Not chaos. At 7:10 the next morning, Helena Price called while pale dawn light was still moving across my bedroom ceiling. Are you alone? She asked. Yes. Good. Do not answer any calls from Martin Kessler. Do not answer Daniel unless you want something in writing. A preservation notice went out at 6:45. The board's outside auditors have frozen the foundation's discretionary accounts. And someone at Whitmore Group tried to wipe a shared drive at 4:12 this morning. I stood barefoot on the wool rug, watching the skyline outside our bedroom windows turn from gray to pearl. Daniel had not come home. He had texted at 2:13 a.m. This has gone far enough. Call me. Then at 2:19. Sophia is unstable. Do not trust her. Then at 2:26. You are making a catastrophic mistake. I had archived all three. What happened at 4:12? I asked. Owen Briggs happened to be waiting for it. I smiled despite myself. Owen was Helena's forensic investigator, a former federal analyst with the face of a tired history teacher and the mind of a locksmith. Helena had brought him in after I showed her the first anomalous vendor cluster in January. What do you need from me? By noon, I need you in my conference room. Bring copies of anything Daniel kept at the house. Devices, paper, old planners, even hotel receipts. People this arrogant always create at least one physical archive because they can't help admiring themselves. He had created several. By 8 o'clock I was in Daniel's study, a room that smelled faintly of cedar drawers and expensive cologne. Morning light fell in clean white bars across the leather desk blotter, the lacquered shelves, the chrome model of a sailboat somebody had given him after a conference in Monaco. I opened exactly 3 drawers before I found the first thing he should have destroyed. A black moleskine with initials embossed in gold. His handwriting filled it in slanted blue ink. Lunch with MK Tuesday. Wants clarity. Move scholarship item before E. Pushes again. People think deception lives in cleverness. It doesn't. It lives in repetition. Liars get lazy where they feel entitled. I found an external drive inside a watch box, a packet of burner phone receipts tucked into a Brioni shoe bag, and a list of donor contact numbers paperclipped to a note in Judith's handwriting. We keep this contained. No board leaks until after the vote. That one I photographed before bagging. Handwriting hits differently in a case file. It strips off the perfume. At 9:40 Daniel walked in. I heard his key in the door downstairs, then the measured pace of his shoes on the staircase. He paused at the study threshold when he saw me wearing slacks and a cream blouse instead of grief. For a second he looked almost disoriented. Then he hardened. What are you doing? Leaving. His gaze dropped to the banker boxes at my feet. 2 already sealed, 1 half full. You don't get to loot this house because you're angry. I clicked the lid onto the 3rd box. It's not looting when the evidence concerns me. He stepped into the room. His tie was gone. Stubble shadowed his jaw. He looked expensive and sleepless, like an advertisement for consequences. Evelyn, listen to me carefully. My father can bury this if you stop now. We can unwind the audit language, move some things around, make it look like a procedural misunderstanding. But if Helena Price pushes this into open litigation, you will get hit too. You made Halcyon. Your name is on paper. I set a labeled evidence sleeve into the box. Yes. That was the point. He spread his hands. Why are you doing this? I looked at him. Really looked. At the faint red line where his wedding band used to sit before he stopped wearing it consistently. At the small pulse jumping in his temple. At the way his right hand kept flexing near his thigh, wanting either to grab me or to hit something and not sure which would serve him better. Because you counted on my silence, I said. Because you mistook my patience for fear. Because you thought you'd get to turn me into a cautionary story over cocktails. His jaw set. This isn't about the money. No, I said. It isn't. He took another step. Then it's about Sophia. I almost laughed. You still think this is personal enough to shrink? It is personal. To you maybe. The words landed. I saw them land. He tried a different tone. Softer. The one he used on shareholders and women in their 20s. Evie. We have history. Don't let Helena use you as a weapon in some career move. There was again. The assumption that every woman in the room could be reduced to emotion or ambition as long as he named the right version of it. She isn't using me, I said. She's representing me. His voice sharpened. You are not built for this. I closed the last box and stood. You'd be surprised what I was built for. He blocked the doorway. Not touching me. Just occupying space. The old strategy. Force someone to route around you, make them feel your permission. Sunlight caught the beveled edge of the picture frame on the credenza behind him, the one from our wedding in Ravello. In it we were both laughing, his hand at the small of my back, the sea behind us a sheet of hammered blue metal. You walk out with those boxes, he said, and this becomes war. I lifted one by the handholds. No. War was dinner. He didn't move. So I took out my phone and raised it slightly. Would you like me to ask Helena whether she'd prefer I document this as witness intimidation or coercive obstruction? He stepped aside. I passed him close enough to smell mint and exhaustion. He said nothing. Neither did I. In the hall, our housekeeper Alma stood frozen beside the linen cabinet, clutching folded towels to her chest. Her eyes met mine for 1 second. She had worked in that house for 6 years and knew where every fracture was. She gave the smallest nod. I returned it and kept walking. By noon I was in Helena's conference room on the 32nd floor of Price and Vale, where the walls were matte walnut and the chairs were saddle leather and the windows turned the river into strips of silver. The room smelled faintly of paper, espresso and rain on stone. Authority has a scent when it's old enough. Helena Price stood at the far end of the table in a charcoal suit that fit like a verdict. She was 52, silver streak in her black hair, voice precise enough to cut silk. Owen Briggs sat beside a spread of printed timelines and device inventories, sleeves rolled to his elbows, reading glasses low on his nose. You look rested, Helena said. I slept 3 hours. Excellent. You won't be sentimental. I liked her more every time she spoke. For the next 2 hours, we rebuilt the Whitmore's narrative with the bones exposed. Owen projected access logs onto the screen. Helena walked me through probable defenses before Daniel had even formed them. We laid out money flows, email chains, server wipes, donor pressure, board timing. Piece by piece the whole shape emerged. The first true reversal wasn't the dinner. It was this, seeing how premeditated it all had been. On January 12th, Daniel emailed Martin Kessler requesting discrete reputational options in case of executive domestic instability. At the time, I had just asked why scholarship checks were being delayed while a media consulting firm called Stonemere Strategies was receiving weekly payments with no deliverables attached. On January 19th, Paige texted Judith that I had become paranoid and probably menopausal, which would have been funny if she weren't 33 and medically illiterate. Judith responded, use tone of concern. Never anger. On February 2nd, Robert approved an emergency governance review. On February 7th, Daniel met with Paul Lund from Internal IT at the Marlowe Grand. We had security footage of them entering through the West Lobby at 8:16 p.m. On February 11th, copies of my credentials began appearing in access requests on files I had never opened. On February 14th, Daniel took Sophia to dinner at Armitage House and, according to the audio she later recorded, told her I was almost handled. On February 26th, Martin circulated a draft crisis statement to Judith and Robert with the subject line, if she resists. If, Helena said, underlining the date with her pen. The language matters. This wasn't preparation for a discovery. It was preparation for an outcome. I sat back and let that settle. Not because it surprised me anymore. Because naming a thing gives it edges. For months I had been moving through a fog of instinct, sensing rot without seeing the architecture. Now the architecture stood there in black type and red markups. Show me Sophia's material again, I said. Owen clicked to a new folder. There were hotel invoices. Calendar invites labeled donor outreach that matched Marlowe Grand room charges. Voice memos recorded accidentally on purpose. One of Daniel in a car saying, if Evelyn goes public, we make it about emotional instability and financial retaliation. Nobody believes a woman leaves quietly unless she was hiding something. Another, more useful, captured Martin, then seed the halcyon angle. People remember shell companies. They don't remember audit trails. Helena didn't smile often, but she did then. It was like seeing a blade catch light. And this, Owen said, opening a PDF, is what Sophia printed and slipped you last night. Foundation narrative final version. It wasn't just a plan to accuse me. It was a script. Suggested phrasing for Judith. Projected objections. A recommendation that Robert remain mostly silent for gravitas. Martin had even included an appendix on how to frame Sophia as an independent corroborating witness, if needed, though apparently Daniel never told Martin he had become sloppy enough to use her laptop. I stared at the page and felt something inside me go still in a new way. Not colder. Cleaner. Helena watched me. You can still settle privately if that's what you want. No, I said. Good. At 3 that afternoon, Martin requested an emergency meeting. Not dinner. Not a phone call. A meeting. By then the auditors had frozen 4 more accounts, and Owen had confirmed that Paul Lund was suddenly unwell and requesting counsel. The pressure was working the way pressure always works. It exposed seams. Helena chose Friday at 10 a.m. at Calder and Wren's principal boardroom, because Martin would assume familiar terrain favored him. That was one of her gifts. She understood that sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to a man is let him lose in his own office. Thursday passed in messages. Judith, we are family. There must be a path back from this. Paige, call me before this gets uglier than it already is. Daniel, Sophia is doing this because she wants money. Daniel, 3 minutes later. If you go into that room tomorrow with Helena, I will tell them everything. That one almost made me smile. Men who say they will tell everything usually mean they hope confession still counts as strategy. I didn't answer any of them. At 8:30 that evening, while I was in the apartment I'd rented in the Gold Coast for the week, Sophia called from an unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. Yes. Her breathing sounded thin and fast. He knows I gave you the packet. I assumed so. I had to leave my apartment. Are you safe? Pause. For tonight. I stood by the tall windows, city lights beginning to bloom below like scattered embers. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and traffic 30 floors down. It still smelled new, all pale oak floors and untouched stone counters and somebody else's idea of a temporary life. You can tell Helena everything tomorrow, I said. Not half. Everything. I know. There was a tremor in her voice I hadn't heard at dinner, the sound of adrenaline after the fact. I didn't do this for you, just so you know. I know. I did it because he told me if this went sideways he'd make it look like I approved the vendor invoices. He said you were already isolated enough that people would believe anything. That, more than the affair, fit Daniel perfectly. Why slip me the envelope then? I asked, instead of going to Helena directly. Her answer came after a long silence. Because I needed to see whether you'd panic. He always said you would. I looked out at Lake Michigan, dark and hard under the evening sky. And you told him to sit down. It wasn't quite a laugh, but something close passed between us. Get some sleep, I said. I doubt that's happening. Then at least get a lock on the door. Friday morning arrived clean and bright, the kind of Chicago spring morning that looks innocent while the wind cuts through wool. Calder and Wren occupied the top floors of a limestone tower on Wacker, all glossy stone lobby and brushed steel and a receptionist desk large enough to baptize people on. Their principal boardroom was paneled in dark walnut with a table so long it seemed designed for dynasties rather than meetings. Leather chairs lined both sides in grave rows. Floor-to-ceiling windows threw cold white light across the polished surface, where crystal water carafes waited beside legal pads embossed with the firm's crest. When I entered with Helena and Owen, the Whitmores were already there. The difference between Friday and Tuesday could be measured in posture. Judith, who had sat at Belrose as if the room belonged to her, now kept her handbag clutched in both hands on her lap. Robert's chin remained high, but the confidence in it had thinned. He looked less like a patriarch than a tired man wearing one. Paige avoided my eyes entirely, scrolling a dead phone screen. Martin Kessler had 2 associates with him and the expression of somebody pretending not to smell smoke. Daniel stood at the window, back half-turned, both hands in his pockets. He did not look at me when I sat down. Good. Helena took the head of the table without asking permission. Let's begin, she said. No one objected. That was the first capitulation. She moved methodically. No speeches. No theatrics. Just evidence laid down in an order that made denial increasingly expensive. Exhibit A, Forensic Audit Tracing Foundation Disbursements through Stonemere Strategies, North Quay Media and Carrick Civic Solutions, all linked through shared beneficial ownership records. Exhibit B, Server logs showing tampering with credential trails connected to devices used by Daniel's office and Calder and Wren legal support. Exhibit C, Draft reputational language prepared before any alleged theft was discovered. Exhibit D, Witness testimony and electronic records from Sophia Marquez. Exhibit E, Robert Whitmore's approval signatures on emergency transfers that bypassed standard scholarship controls. Exhibit F. The board vote to remove me from oversight 2 days after my memorandum flagging irregularities. She didn't raise her voice once. He didn't need to. Every sentence landed with the weight of a gavel wrapped in velvet. Owen walked them through the timeline on the screen. Dates. Times. IP addresses. Lobby footage stills. Red lines connecting entities. I watched Daniel throughout, the way his expression changed not at accusation but at sequence. People can explain away a single bad fact. They cannot explain away a pattern when it's pinned to a calendar. On January 12th, Daniel initiated reputational planning. On January 19th, Judith and Paige discussed how to frame me as unstable. On February 2nd, Robert authorized governance review. On February 7th, Daniel met Paul Lund. On February 11th, credentials were cloned. On February 14th, Sophia recorded Daniel saying I was almost handled. On February 26th, Martin circulated the If She Resists draft. On March 3rd, Halcyon received monitored test transfers. On March 4th, those transfers were cited internally as suspicious. On March 18th, the board removed me. On March 20th, Daniel booked room 1814 at the Marlowe Grand. On March 24th, Foundation narrative final version was circulated. On Tuesday night, they staged dinner. Premeditation is ugly when you make it chronological. Robert interrupted first. You are constructing motive out of governance language and private marital difficulties. Helena folded her hands. No, Mr. Whitmore. I'm constructing fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy out of records. Martin leaned forward. Counsel is taking ordinary reputational contingency planning and recasting it because her client is angry about a marriage breakdown. It was the last time anybody in that room got to use that defense. The door opened. Sophia walked in wearing a navy coat over a simple black dress. No silk blouse now, no ornamental softness. Her hair was tied back. She carried a slim folder against her ribs with both hands, not unlike the way people carry evidence and infants. Daniel went white. You said she wasn't coming, he snapped at Martin. Martin turned slowly. You told me her counsel was unresolved. Helena didn't bother hiding her satisfaction. It isn't. Ms. Marquez retained independent counsel at 9 o'clock this morning and elected to cooperate. Sophia took the chair halfway down the table, not near me, not near Daniel. Neutral ground. Smart. Her voice shook only once on the first sentence. He told me Evelyn was fragile, she said. He said the family had protected her for years and she was becoming dangerous because she'd found accounting issues she couldn't understand. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, maybe in anger, maybe calculation. Sophia kept going. He told me my job was to help clean up messaging. Then he started routing vendor drafts through my laptop because he didn't want them on the home system. At first I thought it was about the affair. Then I realized he was using me to create distance. She placed printed emails on the table one at a time. Methodical. Almost ceremonial. These are the drafts he sent to my account. These are the invoices he told me to move through after hours. These are the texts where he promised I'd be protected if I stayed aligned. And this, she lifted one page slightly higher, is the message where he said if Evelyn wouldn't go quietly, he'd let investigators find the laptop trail and say I acted alone. Paige covered her mouth. Daniel laughed, but it broke in the middle. You are out of your mind. You think they won't turn on you next? Martin didn't answer immediately, which told me more than anything he could have said. One of his associates whispered something in his ear. Martin removed his glasses and polished them, buying seconds. His hands were not quite steady. Potential civil exposure is significant, he said at last. Potential regulatory exposure depends on how far outside counsel intends to push this. Helena nodded once. Criminal referral drafts are prepared. So are donor notifications. So are board disclosures. But my client is prepared to consider a negotiated resolution, contingent on full cooperation. The room changed at that word. Not softening. Fragmenting. Judith turned to Robert. You told me Martin had reviewed everything. Robert stared at Daniel. You told me the girl's involvement was contained. Paige snapped. Don't call her the girl. Jesus Christ. She was sitting at our table while you all acted like this was some PR luncheon. Daniel rounded on her. Are you seriously doing this now? I texted Mom, Paige said, voice rising. I did not steal money. No, Robert said coldly. You simply helped build the mental incompetence angle. Paige stood. Because you told me she was trying to destroy the foundation. Judith's head whipped toward Robert. You said that too. And there was the fracture line running through them all at once, spreading like glass under pressure. The family that had presented itself for years as an indivisible front began doing what people always do when the cost becomes real. They started looking for the person nearest the spark. Helena let them unravel for a full minute before she spoke again. Timing matters. Interruption would have spared them the clarity of hearing one another. My client's terms are straightforward, she said. First, immediate resignation of Daniel Whitmore from all operational roles at Whitmore Group and the Mercer Whitmore Foundation. Second, temporary stepping aside of Robert Whitmore pending independent review. Third, written acknowledgement that Ms. Whitmore's removal from oversight was retaliatory and based on false assumptions constructed by others. Fourth, transfer of full control over the marital residence sale process and release of all jointly held records. Fifth, preservation and production of all devices, emails and paper archives related to the entities at issue. Sixth, a confidential financial settlement and indemnity package to be negotiated separately. Refuse and by 5 p.m. today we file. Daniel laughed again, louder now, almost wild. She wants my resignation. Helena looked at him. No, he already has it. This is me asking whether you'd like to schedule the humiliation. He opened his mouth and closed it. Martin leaned toward Robert, whispering urgently. Robert didn't seem to hear him. His eyes were on the timeline screen, specifically the date of the board vote. He looked older than he had on Tuesday. Not weaker. Just suddenly mortal. I want separate counsel, Paige said. Judith turned to her in disbelief. Paige. I am not going down because Daniel couldn't keep his pants zipped or his fake companies straight. Daniel slammed one palm onto the table. Water jumped in the glasses. Watch your mouth. Or what? She shot back. You'll script me too? The silence after that was sharp enough to taste. I had not spoken much since the meeting began. That was intentional. Let the professionals make the case. Let the guilty reveal themselves in the gaps. But Helena glanced at me then, a small permission, and I knew the moment had come. I leaned forward and looked at Daniel. Do you remember what you said to me in December? I asked quietly, after the winter gala. About trust. His eyes narrowed. He said nothing. You told me powerful families survive because they keep ugly things private. I folded my hands. I took that seriously. That's why I didn't confront you in January. I wanted to see how ugly you'd let it get. Judith stared at me. Robert looked away. Daniel's voice came out low. You set me up. I shook my head once. No. I made sure you'd find exactly what I wanted you to find. His mouth tightened. I continued. I wanted you to see Halcyon. I wanted the board to notice a company with my fingerprint on it. I wanted you comfortable enough to move faster. And you did. Martin's face shifted then just slightly. Not at the trap itself. At the realization that Halcyon had not been a hidden lane around scrutiny. It had been a lit corridor leading into it. You cannot prove inducement, he said. Helena answered before I could. We don't need inducement, Mr. Kessler. We already have participation. Sophia spoke again, more steadily now. He also told me to make sure Judith saw the first set of transfer screenshots before Robert did, because she'd react emotionally and force a confrontation. He wanted the family angle because, quote, she still thinks loyalty works on us. Judith flinched as though struck. I looked at her. Not unkindly. Just clearly. That must have been difficult to hear. She had no answer. Owen changed the screen to a final slide. Cross-exposure matrix. The title alone seemed to deflate half the room. Under it sat a table showing who had touched which decision, which account, which communication channel. Daniel's row was thick with entries. Robert's nearly as much. Judith's less but enough. Paige's sparse but ugly. Barnes, substantial. One more thing, Owen said mildly. Paul Lund requested proffer protection this morning. Martin went still. Helena let that breathe. Then, he has already described the credential cloning request, the deletion instructions, and the pressure applied after Ms. Whitmore's memorandum was archived. Daniel turned to Martin so abruptly his chair wheels scraped. You said he was handled. Martin said nothing. which was answer enough. I tilted my head slightly. Next time, make sure they're not working for both sides. No one even pretended not to understand me. The first signature came from Paige. Not because she was noble. Because she was frightened. Helena had prepared an acknowledgement of non-involvement conditioned on cooperation and testimony. Paige read only the first 2 pages before signing, hand moving too fast, her usual looping signature reduced to a nervous slash. Judith lasted 12 more minutes. She argued about wording, about optics, about social consequences, about whether retaliatory could be replaced with procedurally flawed. Helena said no each time. Eventually Judith took the pen with fingers held delicately apart, as if the ink itself might stain her. Robert resisted longest. He wanted private caucus. He wanted board consultation. He wanted to know whether donor disclosure could be delayed. Helena listened, said no, and reminded him that if criminal referrals were filed before business close, delay would no longer be his to negotiate. He signed with the heavy, controlled fury of a man accustomed to signatures making things happen in his favor. The fact that this one did not seem to wound him more than any public scandal. Daniel did not sign until Martin quietly told him, "If you don't, I withdraw." It got through. He took the pen, stared at the page, then at me. The hatred was gone now. Fear had eaten it. Fear and the awful late arrival of comprehension. He had thought the dinner was the climax. He had thought humiliating me in private would reset the board, the marriage, the story. He had never understood that once a narrative leaves your control, it doesn't stop at the room you built for it. He signed. The sound was soft. Just ink on expensive paper. It felt louder than the table slap. Helena gathered the documents, checked each page, and handed copies across with the detached efficiency of someone reviewing shipping manifests. Independent monitorship will be proposed by Monday. Device collection begins today. My office will coordinate. Ms. Marquez's counsel will remain in contact regarding witness protection and indemnity issues. If anyone in this room deletes, alters, or conceals records after this meeting, my client will pursue every remedy available. Martin asked for copies of the criminal referral drafts. Helena smiled very slightly. Earn them. When the meeting ended, chairs moved back one by one. The whole family seemed diminished by inches. Judith kept her eyes on the table. Paige was already texting, no doubt rewriting herself as collateral damage in somebody else's disaster. Robert walked to the window and stood there with both hands clasped behind him, staring down at the river as if markets or weather might still offer instruction. Daniel lingered by the doorway while the others filed out. For a second I thought he wanted one final performance. Apology perhaps. Threat. Some last attempt to reclaim narrative control. Instead he said quietly, "How long did you know?" "About the fraud," I said, slipping on my coat. "Or about Sophia." Something hollow crossed his face. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said. "I think it's finished." He looked at me the way people look at buildings after an earthquake, unable to reconcile the intact facade with the fact that the interior has already shifted forever. "You could have come to me." I almost pitied him then. Almost. "I did," I said. "In January. With questions. You answered by planning my collapse." He had no response to that. None that still sounded like power. I stepped past him into the corridor, where the carpet muted everything and the wall sconces cast warm pools of light on cream plaster. Sophia stood near the elevators with her attorney, shoulders finally down from around her ears. She met my gaze. I gave her a single nod. She nodded back. As the elevator doors opened, Daniel said behind me, "You always wanted to win." I turned just enough to look at him over my shoulder. "No," I said. "I wanted the truth to have documents." Then I stepped inside and the doors closed on his reflection. 6 months later, I woke to sunlight spreading across oak floorboards in an apartment that belonged entirely to me. It was a Saturday in early October. The kind of morning Chicago does perfectly in brief, golden flashes before winter takes the city back. My bedroom windows faced east and the lake beyond them was bright as hammered glass. I lay still for a moment under linen sheets, listening to the radiator tick softly and the muted clatter from the cafe downstairs beginning to rise through the courtyard. There is a special peace in waking up somewhere no one has ever tried to control you. My kitchen was all pale stone and matte black fixtures, not grand, not performative. Just clean lines, warm wood, 3 shelves of dishes I had chosen myself, and a French press sitting beside a bowl of late peaches. I padded across the floor in wool socks, ground coffee, opened the balcony door, and let in a stripe of cold air that smelled faintly of leaves and the lake. The first sip was strong and a little bitter. Perfect. People imagine justice as a single scene. A verdict. A slap. A headline. It almost never is. Real justice is administrative. It arrives in envelopes, board minutes, revised articles of incorporation, locked office doors, withdrawn invitations, frozen accounts, changed passwords, and the quiet horror of people realizing their names no longer open rooms. Robert Whitmore resigned from the foundation within 10 days of the Calder and Wren meeting and stepped down from Whitmore Group by Thanksgiving. The Independent Review found enough governance deficiencies to make every paper in the city write around the truth without quite printing it. Donors withdrew. One hospital wing quietly removed the Whitmore plaque pending re-evaluation of a pledge. Robert hated that most of all, I was told. Not the money. Not the scrutiny. The blank rectangle on the wall where his name had been. Judith tried to keep her social footing. For a month she hosted lunches at the Astor Club and spoke about family hardship, with perfect posture and wet eyes. Then board chairs stopped calling. One museum committee asked her to take a season. Another requested she refrain from representing the institution publicly while governance issues remained under review. Women who had once air-kissed both cheeks began offering her one. In certain circles, that's how exile looks. Page survived because women like Page always do, but not without dents. Her lifestyle column lost its syndication slot after subpoenaed texts leaked in a trade item and made her look exactly what she was: frivolous at the scene of a financial fire. She rebranded as a wellness and transparency voice, which would have been offensive if it weren't so predictable. Last I heard, she was posting filtered videos about boundaries from a rental in Miami. Martin Kessler resigned from Calder and Wren before they could announce an internal review. The firm framed it as retirement. Nobody believed them. He kept his license, at least at first, but his client list thinned like winter hair. Powerful people are loyal only to the illusion of competence. Once that breaks, they move on briskly. Paul Lund cooperated early. He avoided criminal charges in exchange for records and testimony. Owen, in one of his drier moods, told me Paul now worked remote contract IT for a medical billing company in Tulsa and answered emails within 4 minutes no matter the hour. Fear can be a career coach. Daniel lost his operating role immediately, as Helena had promised he would. Whitmore Group announced a leave of absence, then a transition, then a strategic restructuring that placed him nowhere. His name disappeared from the annual report. A venture fund quietly rescinded an advisory seat. He rented a furnished condo in River North with a view of somebody else's success and started posting articles about resilience and leadership after crisis as if LinkedIn were a confessional booth. When the settlement finalized, he kept enough money to remain comfortable, which was fine by me. Poverty wasn't the lesson he needed. Irrelevance was. The messages came in waves. At first they were hard-edged. Daniel, you wanted blood. I hope you're enjoying it. Daniel, 2 days later. Martin is shifting blame. Call me. Judith, we must speak before this reaches your aunt in Boston. Paige, if you cared about the family even a little, you'd shut down the gossip. Then they changed. Daniel, I miss the way we used to talk before everything became a transaction. Judith, the house feels empty. Paige, Thanksgiving was bizarre. Mom cried over the squash. Then they became practical, almost plaintive. Daniel, do you know where the blue Murano vase from Ravello ended up? Judith, the family isn't the same. Daniel, I found your old scarf in a box. I answered none of them. I built a folder called Archive and dragged each message there without opening the thread a second time. Some evenings, when the city outside my windows blurred with rain and memory felt more persuasive than fact, I looked at the folder count and reminded myself that nostalgia is just selective editing performed by the injured ego. The strangest part of Aftermath wasn't the loss. It was the space. Once the legal dust settled and the marital residence sold and the last banker box from Helena's office was either returned, digitized, or shredded, I found myself with something I hadn't possessed in years: unallocated skill. All the instincts I had sharpened surviving the Whitmores: pattern recognition, donor diplomacy, document control, internal investigation triage, reading a room before it turned, were suddenly mine to use somewhere honest. By January, I had founded Mercer Advisory, a boutique risk and governance consultancy helping private foundations, family offices, and founder-led companies audit internal fraud exposure before it became public scandal. Helena sent me 2 clients in the first month. Evelyn sent one more with the note, "She reminds me of you. This is meant as a warning." The office I leased in a brick building in Fulton Market had exposed beams, black-framed glass, and one long walnut table where people finally told the truth because no one there was paid to protect appearances. We kept good coffee, better records, and a standing rule. If somebody asked you to move money fast, say no in writing. I hired Alma's niece, Teresa, fresh out of Northwestern's accounting program. I hired a former nonprofit operations lead named Mona Chin who could smell fabricated invoices through drywall. And in February, after a careful conversation and 3 weeks of checking that she genuinely wanted the work for the right reasons, I hired Sofia Marquez on a contract basis to build witness protection protocols and executive communications triage. That part always surprises people when they hear the story. They expect bitterness to be linear. They expect women to preserve their wounds like trophies. Life is usually stranger and more useful than that. The first time Sofia came into the office as part of my team, snow was falling in slow white sheets outside the windows, softening the steel and brick of the city into charcoal and milk. She stood just inside the door in a camel coat, holding a laptop bag with both hands, looking like someone arriving at a place she wasn't yet sure she'd earned. "You can still change your mind," she said. "I know," I replied. She nodded once. "I brought the vendor matrix revisions." "Then you're already useful." That made her laugh, and the tension in her shoulders dropped an inch. We never became the kind of friends who pretended the beginning didn't matter. There are some histories you don't bleach. You build with them carefully like reclaimed wood. But trust, when it does grow after damage, has a different grain. Less decorative. Stronger. On a Thursday in March, Helena stopped by the office just after 5. She never visited socially unless she had information or bourbon in mind. This time it was both. She stood by the window in a navy coat, watching rush hour lights thread through wet streets below. "You won't believe who I just saw in federal mediation," she said. I looked up from a redlined governance policy. "Robert." She smiled into her glass. "Martin. That is less surprising. He wanted separate counsel from separate counsel." I leaned back in my chair. "How desperate." "More interesting than desperate. He offered cooperation in a matter touching one of Robert's old municipal contracts." I let out a breath through my nose. "They are eating one another alive." Helena took a sip. "You built a very educational ecosystem." That was one of the karma updates I enjoyed most. Not the pain itself, but the irony. The Whitmores had survived for years by assuming loyalty could be purchased, inherited, or frightened into permanence. Under pressure, every arrangement they trusted turned transactional in the ugliest possible way. The machinery they had built to protect themselves turned out to be made of paper clips and vanity. Another update came from Teresa one rainy afternoon while we were ordering Thai from the place on Green Street. "Do you remember Paige Whitmore?" she asked, scrolling her phone. "Unfortunately." Teresa grinned. "She launched a subscription course called Curating Grace Under Pressure." I put my glasses down. "Please tell me this is a joke." "It is not. Module 1 is apparently about reputational alignment." Even Mona, who rarely laughed out loud at work, made a sound into her tea. That was the thing. Once enough time passed, the whole saga stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like whether I'd survived. The details remained, but they no longer occupied the center of the room. So they tried. On the anniversary of the Belrose dinner, Daniel sent a single text at 11:47 p.m. "I know I don't deserve a response. But for what it's worth, you were the strongest person in every room, and I hated that because I knew it before anyone else did." I looked at the message under the low light of my living room lamp, the city beyond the windows blurred by spring rain. For a moment I saw him as he had been in the beginning. Sharp, charming, ambitious, amused by my seriousness, drawn to it even while resenting it. Memory can dress itself in flattering fabric when it wants back in. Then I archived the message and turned the lamp off. Not every door needs to be slammed. Some can just remain closed. That spring, Mercer Advisory landed its biggest client yet. a second-generation manufacturing family on the North Shore whose board had begun to suspect that a favored son was moving pension assets through a vendor network nobody else understood. Helena referred them with a 3-word email: your natural habitat. She wasn't wrong. We spent 6 weeks mapping exposure, interviewing finance staff, preserving device trails, and building a disclosure plan that protected the employees who had raised concerns early. On the day the matter settled, the family matriarch, a woman with silver hair, pearl earrings, and eyes too intelligent for the room she'd inherited, took my hand in the foyer of their office and said, "You speak to people as if panic is beneath you." I smiled. Usually it is. It wasn't bravado. It was practice. Composure isn't temperament. It's a decision repeated until it becomes architecture. By summer, my life had acquired the kind of quiet shape that once would have bored the younger version of me and now felt luxurious beyond reason. Early runs along the lake. Espresso from the downstairs cafe where the owner always saved me the corner table when he could. Friday strategy sessions with Mona and Teresa around the walnut table. Sunday dinners with my brother Andrew and his wife Lena in Andersonville, where the wine was decent and nobody turned conversation into leverage. A standing monthly drink with Helena, who pretended not to enjoy it and then stayed for 2 rounds. A small circle. A clean life. Light where it should be. And sometimes, unexpectedly, Sophia. We didn't force closeness. It arrived in increments. A late meeting that turned into noodles in takeout cartons. A shared look during a client interview when some executive tried to perform sincerity and neither of us bought it. Her confession months in, that she had nearly left Chicago after the Calder and Wren meeting but stayed because running felt too much like letting him write the last paragraph. My admission that I had almost ignored her envelope because I thought it was another invitation to humiliation. "You really might have?" she asked. I shrugged. I was tired. She smiled over her coffee. "You hid it well." That was my problem for years. By August, the story people thought they knew about us had become too simplistic to be useful. I was not the sainted wife. She was not the cartoon mistress. We were 2 women who had been used in different ways by the same man and who had chosen at different moments to stop being useful to him. That's not sentiment. That's alignment. One warm September evening, after a long day and a better week, Sophia came up to my rooftop with a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling rose and 2 paper cartons of truffle fries from the bistro on the corner. The sky over the city was turning the color of apricots and copper. Glass towers caught the sunset and held it for a minute before letting it go. Down below, traffic moved in red and white threads through the avenues, each car carrying some private urgency that had nothing to do with mine. We sat in low chairs near the edge of the roof, the wood decking still warm from the day's heat. Someone in a neighboring building was playing jazz softly enough that it arrived only in fragments. Sophia had traded her old polished glamour for something simpler over the months. Soft white shirt, dark jeans, hair clipped up loosely, no performance in it. She poured the sparkling rose into 2 short glasses and held one out. "To survival," she said. I took it. "Too narrow." "To documentation." I smiled. "Better." Our glasses touched with a clean, bright sound. For a while we just watched the sun lower itself behind the buildings. There are evenings when the whole city seems to exhale with you. Orange light settled over the roofs, over the brick chimneys and steel rails and planted terraces, turning edges gentle. In that light even old damage looked translated. Sophia ate a fry and glanced at me. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't given you the envelope?" "Sometimes." "And?" I rolled the stemless glass slowly between my palms. "You still would have come apart eventually. Men like Daniel always mistake momentum for invincibility. But it would have cost me more." She nodded, accepting that. "I used to think you hated me," she said after a moment. "I did," I said. He barked out a laugh. "Honest. I value efficiency." Her smile softened. "Fair." I turned the glass in my hand and looked out at the west horizon, where the last band of orange sat above the darkening skyline like a low-burning fuse. But hatred is expensive. And it keeps the wrong person at the center. That was one of the last things the Whitmores taught me, though they never meant to. Before all of this, I believed dignity meant endurance. I thought being good at absorbing pressure was the same as being strong. I had spent years translating myself into something palatable for people who only respected what they could use. I called it patience. I called it loyalty. Sometimes I even called it love. Really, it was a kind of educated self-erasure, polished and socially acceptable and very easy to mistake for virtue. The woman I had been in that house, at those dinners, in those offices, was not weak. She was simply loyal to the wrong audience. The woman I am now still measures rooms. Still notices the tremor in a hand, the lie tucked into a phrase, the missing document, the over-explained expense line. But she no longer uses that intelligence to protect people determined to injure her. She uses it to protect herself, her work, the people who sit across from my table and quietly say, "Something is wrong and no one will tell me what it is." She uses it to build instead of buffer. To clarify instead of cushion. To leave when leaving is the truth. I have, in private moments, thanked Daniel for that. Not aloud. He doesn't deserve the intimacy of hearing it. But in the silent chambers of my own mind, where meaning gets its final shape, I have thanked him. I have thanked Judith for underestimating me so consistently it became camouflage. I have thanked Robert for teaching me exactly how power behaves when it believes itself untouchable. I have even thanked Martin, in a way, for writing their collapse down so neatly that all I had to do was print it. Not because they were right. Not because pain is noble. Not because betrayal is a gift. Those are the kinds of cheap philosophies people offer when they want suffering to sound useful. What I mean is simpler than that. They forced a reckoning I should have chosen sooner. They stripped away every comfortable illusion about marriage, class, gratitude, and proximity to power. They made it impossible for me to continue being a smaller version of myself just to keep a polished table peaceful. Below us, the city lights began coming on one floor at a time. Office towers blinked awake in reverse. Apartments glowed amber behind curtains. A plane crossed the deepening blue above the lake, its lights moving slowly, steadily, like a thought finding direction. Sophia raised her glass again. "To 24 hours, she said. I lifted mine. To what people do with them. We drank. The air had cooled enough now that I could feel autumn entering the evening by degrees. Somewhere on the street below, someone laughed too loudly. A siren passed in the distance and faded. The sky moved from copper to violet, and the first city stars, those patient man-made ones, took over where the sun left off. If I could speak to the version of myself who sat at Belrose with that envelope in her lap and the whole room leaning in for her humiliation, I wouldn't tell her not to be afraid. Fear is information. I wouldn't tell her to be kinder, louder, smarter, prettier, less trusting, more suspicious. She had already spent enough of her life trying to optimize herself against other people's damage. I think I would just tell her this. Keep your hands steady. Let them talk. And when it's time, make sure the truth has paper. Because in the end, the thing that changed my life wasn't the affair or the fraud or even the exposure. It was the moment I understood that composure could be a weapon, that clarity could be an exit, and that silence only serves you if you are the one controlling when it ends. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about making them hurt. It's about building a life their damage can no longer enter. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about their ruin at all. It's about your freedom.